I'm Sophie, 28, and I work as a graphic designer in Chicago. From the outside, it might seem like I've got it all together, decent job, nice apartment, friends. But that couldn't be further from the truth. My life, especially the family part, has been falling apart for the past year. A while ago, my dad's business went under, and just like that, we were plunged into financial chaos. It came out of nowhere. It's like the rug was pulled from under us, and we never saw it coming. My parents' dad, especially, were devastated. Their lifestyle was shattered overnight. I had to pack up my life in the city and move back to the suburbs to live with them, along with my 22-year-old sister, Emma. Now, my paycheck is the lifeline for the family. It's crazy how fast things flipped. I ended up shouldering most of the bills, paying for groceries, rent, even some of the utilities. It felt like I was drowning in responsibilities. But it wasn't just the bills that were weighing on me. It was everything else being back in my childhood home after so many years, trying to manage everything on my own while my parents were, well, not exactly stepping up. One night, we were sitting in the living room trying to figure out dinner plans. My mom looked up from her phone and said, "Sophie, honey, you mentioned you wanted to have lasagna tomorrow. Do you still feel like it?" I froze. Lasagna. Right. I remembered saying I wanted that, but it wasn't exactly in the budget. Honestly, Mom, I'm not sure we can afford lasagna right now. The grocery fund's running low. I can't even buy enough veggies for a salad this week. Mom looked at me with that, "Oh, I didn't know it was that bad" expression. "Couldn't you just manage a little more with the budget?" she asked, almost pleading. Emma chimed in from the corner, arms crossed, with a look that screamed, "I'm done with this." "You know, you really don't give enough for groceries. It's like we're always scraping by," she said. I turned to her, genuinely shocked. "What do you mean? I'm literally covering almost everything. My job pays for everything here. How could I possibly give more? I'm already giving $5,000 a month." She scoffed. $5,000 isn't enough anymore. It's just not enough for this house." Emma's tone was dismissive, as if she hadn't been living off my money for the past several months. I couldn't believe it. My blood boiled. "Fine, I'll give $6,000 a month," I shot back. "But if that's still not enough, maybe you should get a job yourself and help with food." Mom jumped in, defending Emma. "It's not easy for Emma to find a job right now," she said. Her voice had that soft, overprotective tone that had always bothered me. "She's been looking, but it's hard." I almost snapped. I knew Emma hadn't been looking. She'd been saying she was, but honestly, she just didn't want to work. One had figured out recently that Mom had been secretly giving Emma part of my money as pocket money. That was the last straw. "Enough," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my anger was rising. "If things are so hard here, why don't we sell the house and move to Aunt Karen's place? It's out in the country, but maybe we could find work there and things might be easier." Mom's reaction was swift, and she didn't even think twice before shutting me down. "No, I will not go back there. Your aunt's place is tiny and it's not the same. We're staying here, Sophie. There's no way." I blinked, confused. It made sense to me. Aunt Karen had a small, cozy restaurant, and she was a lot more strict about working for a living. But it wasn't about comfort. It was about surviving. You know, I could also talk to Aunt Karen. Maybe she'd let us work at the restaurant. Free meals, a place to stay. It wouldn't be too bad. "No," Mom said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not going back to that town. Not after everything that's happened." Emma spoke up again, looking at me as if I were the problem. "You're always talking about leaving, Sophie. Maybe you should just stop complaining and try harder to make this work. We're doing the best we can here." The frustration building inside me was overwhelming. I turned to Dad, looking for some support. "Dad, don't you think Emma should try getting a part-time job? I mean, she's 22. It's not a crime to work part-time to help out." Dad, though, was on Emma's side. "Your sister's doing what she can. She helps around the house," he said. "What does that even mean?" I asked, stunned. "I've never seen her do anything more than take the dishes to the sink after dinner. And Mom, I found out you've been giving her my money. I'm the one handling the bills and managing everything. And you're letting her live here for free? Spending my money." Suddenly, it felt like everything was falling apart. How could they not see what was happening? How could they think it was okay for Emma to do nothing while I did everything? I was furious, but more than that, I was starting to feel resentful. I suggested. If we're really that broke, maybe we could sell this house and move back to Grandma's place. It's not like we're really attached to this house anymore. Maybe we could have a fresh start. Mom immediately shot that idea down. No, Sophie, I won't go back to that life. I pushed harder. It wouldn't be so bad. Grandma's got her restaurant. We could all work there. It might actually be nice. Again, she refused. No, it hit me then. I was the one trying to fix everything while they were perfectly content letting me do all the work. Emma wasn't even trying, and Mom and Dad were enabling her. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. I couldn't take it anymore. Something had to change. But what? The days after that night felt like a blur. Every morning, I'd wake up, do the same routine, and leave for work, all while carrying this weight on my shoulders. The tension in the house was unbearable. It was like everyone was ignoring the elephant in the room. Emma spent her days lounging in her room, playing games, scrolling through her phone, and, of course, never lifting a finger to help. I started to dread coming home. Then, a few days later, I noticed something odd. Emma had been gone for hours. At first, I thought she was just out with friends, maybe grabbing a coffee or hanging out. But by the third day, I started to get suspicious. Where was she? She wasn't answering texts or calls. It wasn't like her. Emma was always attached to her phone. One evening, I came back from work later than usual, exhausted. I was heading to my room when I heard my parents talking in the living room. Their voices were lower than normal, like they didn't want anyone to overhear. But I was already standing in the hallway, and something about their tone made me stop. "Can't wait to see the souvenirs from Hawaii," Mom said, her voice full of excitement. "Emma's so lucky. I wish I could get away like that." "Wait, Hawaii? What do you mean, Hawaii?" I blurted, stepping into the room. Both of them froze, clearly not expecting me. "Oh, you're home early," Dad said, trying to cover up his surprise. Yeah. Emma won a trip. You know, one of those sweepstakes. She's in Hawaii right now." I stood there for a moment, completely dumbfounded. Emma? In Hawaii? She hadn't mentioned a thing to me. There was no way she could afford a trip like that, and we were barely scraping by. I tried to keep calm, but I could feel my anger bubbling up. "She's in Hawaii? And you didn't think to mention it to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How is that even possible?" "She doesn't have any money?" Mom smiled, completely unaware of how upset I was. "Oh, it's no big deal. It's a free trip. She won it. She's been really lucky lately with those things." I just stared at them, trying to process what they were saying. Emma, who hadn't lifted a finger to help out around here, was living it up in Hawaii, on some free trip. Meanwhile, I was busting my ass just to keep things together, but I didn't say anything more. I didn't know how. The next day, when I was at work, I got a call that made my blood run cold. It was from my credit card company, asking me to verify some recent charges. I wasn't worried at first. I barely used the thing, but then they told me something that made my heart drop into my stomach. Miss Sophie," the agent said, "there have been some rather large charges on your card in the last 5 days. Over $180,000, actually." My mind raced. That couldn't be right. I hadn't made any big purchases. I didn't even remember using my card in the last week. "How much exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. $185,000, to be exact, the agent replied. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I didn't need to think twice. I knew exactly who was behind it, Emma. There was no way I'd spent that kind of money, and I was almost certain she had used my card without asking. She was the only one who had access to it when I wasn't home. I wasn't even sure how she'd gotten the number, but I knew it was her. I couldn't just let this slide. Not after everything I'd been through, so I called her. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? I just got a call from my credit card company." "You've been using my card without permission. Care to explain?" "Oh, you noticed?" She replied casually, like it was no big deal. "Yeah, I did, but it's not that serious. You know, I had to pay for everything in Hawaii flights, meals, shopping, the whole experience. You wouldn't believe how expensive this place is. I could barely contain my anger." "You spent $185,000. How is that not serious?" She laughed. "Relax, Sophie. It wasn't even that much, honestly. The flight and hotel were free, so I had to cover everything else, you know? A few fancy dinners, some shopping, taxis. You can't expect me to pay for all that out of my own pocket, right? My mind was racing. I was so furious I couldn't speak. How could she think this was okay? Emma, this is not how families work. You can't just use someone else's credit card like that. That's theft. She sounded completely unfazed. It's fine, Sophie. It's not like you'll need the card after it expires, right? I just used it because it was about to go to waste. Anyway, I'll leave the bill to you. Thanks for the trip. I was speechless. She didn't even sound sorry. In fact, she sounded pleased with herself. I canceled the card immediately, and then things started to spiral out of control. Emma kept calling, leaving voicemails, sending texts, acting like nothing had happened. I ignored every single one of them. I was done. But when I got home that night, it was like nothing had changed. Mom and Dad were acting like everything was fine. They were acting normal. Like I hadn't just found out that Emma had racked up nearly $200,000 in my credit card. I was done pretending. I couldn't keep doing this. What's going on? I asked them. Why are you acting like everything's okay? Emma used my card without asking. You can't just ignore this. Mom sighed, looking at me with a bit of disappointment in her eyes. Sophie, she's just a kid. You're being too hard on her. I'm being too hard on her? I echoed, incredulous. She stole from me and you think I'm being too hard? Dad spoke up, trying to sound calm. We'll figure it out, Sophie. It's not the end of the world. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents were taking Emma's side. They didn't even seem to care that I was the one who had to clean up after everyone. I wasn't just mad anymore, I was hurt. So hurt that I didn't even know what to do next. That was when I decided to do something drastic. If they wanted to act like this was all my responsibility, then fine. I would make sure they felt the consequences of their actions. The days after that heated exchange were like walking on eggshells. Every morning, I'd get up, go to work, and come home to the same routine, Emma lounging in the living room, Mom cooking dinner, Dad on the couch watching TV. No one really spoke much, at least not to me. It was like they were avoiding confrontation, but I wasn't fooled. I could feel the tension in the air every time I walked through the door. They knew they'd messed up, and deep down, I knew they expected me to just brush it off. But I couldn't. I spent the next few days stewing in my frustration. I wasn't going to just sit back and let Emma walk all over me. I couldn't keep letting my family treat me like this. I'd been their crutch for so long, but now, enough was enough. I had to do something. Then, one night, as I was heading out for a quick errand, I noticed something odd. A piece of paper sticking out from under the front door. It was a letter. At first, I thought it might be a bill or something that had been misplaced. But when I bent down to pick it up, I noticed the handwriting on the envelope. It was addressed to me. I froze. No one ever wrote me letters anymore. I opened it slowly, curiosity gnawing at me. Inside was a note, neatly written, Sophie. I know things have been hard, but please don't give up on us. I'm sorry for how everything went down. I've been thinking a lot, and I know I've let you down. You've always been there for me. Maybe I can start making it right. Love, Emma. I stared at the words for a long time, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at her for being so insincere, but another part of me was hopeful. I didn't know how to feel. Emma had always been the kind of person who'd say whatever she needed to in order to get out of trouble. But this was different. The letter was too heartfelt, too honest. It wasn't like her at all. Still, I wasn't ready to forgive her just yet. She had crossed a line, a massive one. I wasn't about to pretend like everything was fine just because she'd written a note. But maybe, just maybe it was a sign she was finally starting to understand how much damage she'd caused. The next day, I woke up early. The house was still quiet when I made my coffee, the sun just beginning to peek through the curtains. I sat at the kitchen table, holding the letter in my hand, lost in thought. I knew I couldn't keep going on like this. Something had to change. I'd been planning my move for a while now, but this letter, this tiny sliver of sincerity from Emma, made me second-guess my next step. I didn't know what was going on in her head, but I couldn't ignore the fact that maybe, just maybe, she was trying to make amends. I wasn't about to wait around forever, though. The thing was, as much as I wanted to believe Emma, I couldn't forget how she'd used me, how she'd stolen from me, and that wasn't something you just forgive overnight. My family wasn't going to change that quickly. It was time for me to take matters into my own hands, once and for all. I spent the next few days preparing. I had a plan. I wasn't just going to confront Emma and my parents. I was going to make sure they understood exactly how much I'd been carrying for them, how I'd been the one to hold everything together while they sat back and let me do it. I'd been the one paying all the bills, managing the house, taking care of their needs, all while they acted like I was some kind of endless money tree. But I wasn't their ATM anymore. I began to clear out my savings. I made a few phone calls. I contacted a real estate agent. I was serious about making this change, about stepping away from everything I'd been holding on to for so long. The house was going to be sold. I didn't care how upset they were. It wasn't my problem anymore. That night, as I sat in my room, I overheard my parents again. This time, their voices were full of guilt. "I don't know what to do, Carol," I heard Dad say. "I feel like we're losing her. Sophie's changed. She's not the same." Mom sighed heavily. "I know. I don't know what to do either. I feel like we're losing her too. But she's been so distant lately. I don't know how to fix it." I listened in silence, my chest tightening. They were right. I had changed. But they hadn't made any effort to stop it. They hadn't tried to fix things. They were still playing the victim, still acting like I was the one who was in the wrong. They had no idea what it felt like to carry the weight of the family, to have everything rest on your shoulders and not get a single word of appreciation. No, they were too caught up in their own problems to notice that I was falling apart. I decided right then that I wasn't going to just leave. I was going to make sure they felt the consequences. If they didn't understand what they'd done to me, maybe this would wake them up. I spent the next day looking for places to live. I found a small apartment on the edge of the city, a place just big enough for me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't need anything fancy. I just needed a space where I could finally breathe again. When I came home that evening, I could see the unease on my parents' faces. They knew something was off. I could feel the tension, the unspoken questions hanging in the air, but they didn't say anything. Not yet. "Mom, Dad," I said calmly, my voice steady. "I've made a decision." They both turned to look at me. I saw the uncertainty in their eyes. "I'm moving out," I said, my words hanging heavy between us. "I'm done. I can't keep doing this." Mom's face went pale and Dad's mouth tightened. "What do you mean, Sophie? You can't just leave us. We need you." I shook my head. "You need to understand I'm not your backup plan anymore. I've given everything, and I've had enough. I'm done." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them standing there, speechless. I couldn't let myself feel guilty. Not this time. They had taken me for granted for too long, and it was time for me to finally take control of my own life. The next day, I started packing. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just getting away from my family. I was moving towards something better, something that was mine, and only mine. But I still hadn't figured out what to do about Emma. I wasn't sure if I could trust her yet. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. But one thing was for sure, things were about to get a lot more complicated. The next few days were a whirlwind. I was moving forward with my plan to leave, but it wasn't easy. There was a mix of excitement and apprehension swirling inside me. I'd lived in that house for so long, and as much as it felt like a prison, it was also the place I'd called home. But that's exactly it, isn't it? Home, a word that's supposed to represent safety, security, love. Except for me, it had become the opposite. I found myself packing late into the night, the sound of tape being torn and boxes being stacked filling the silence. It was the first time in months that I didn't feel like I was suffocating. I was finally doing something for myself. The thought of living alone, of having my own space, was exhilarating. I didn't need to worry about paying for everyone else's mistakes or dealing with their constant demands. I could finally breathe. But then there was Emma. I had been avoiding her for days, not knowing what to say. She kept texting, calling, even leaving me messages. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not after everything. But it didn't stop her. One morning, just as I was packing the last of my things, I got a message that made me stop everything. "Can we talk? I need to apologize." It was Emma. And this time, it felt different. Her message wasn't filled with excuses or deflections. There was a rawness to it that made me hesitate. Maybe it was the fact that she was finally acknowledging what had happened. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I wanted to believe she could change. But I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of my anger just yet. I thought about it for a while. It was a huge decision. I had every reason to stay mad, to shut her out completely. But a part of me still clung to the hope that maybe she wasn't beyond redemption. Maybe, just maybe, she could realize the gravity of what she'd done. So I agreed to meet her. I told her to come over in the evening just before I left. I didn't want to be around for too long after. My heart was racing with anticipation and fear. Could I even forgive her? Could I even look at her without remembering what she'd done? When she showed up, she looked different. I barely recognized her. Gone was the careless, self-centered girl who always got away with everything. In her place was someone who seemed almost fragile, unsure of herself. She was standing at the door, nervously tapping her fingers against her phone. "Sophie," she started, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm sorry. I know I've messed up. I've been a terrible sister, and I don't know how to fix it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to shout at her, to tell her how much pain she had caused me. But another part of me, this tiny, fragile part, wanted to believe that she truly understood what she'd done. "Do you?" I asked, the words coming out in a sharp, trembling breath. "Do you understand how much you hurt me? I've been carrying everything, Emma. I've been paying the bills, managing the house, covering for Mom and Dad, and you've just been taking everything from me." Her face dropped. She looked like I had slapped her. "I know, I do. I've been stupid. I never realized how much you were doing. I've been blind to it all, and I'm sorry. I can't change what I've done, but I can try to do better." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But after everything, it wasn't that simple. She had taken from me, used me, and then without a care spent nearly $200,000 in things that weren't even necessary. She hadn't even apologized for that. Not until now. "What about the credit card?" I pressed. "You used my card without asking. You spent money that wasn't yours. Do you think that's okay?" She flinched at the mention of the credit card, but I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. I never meant for things to get that out of hand. I didn't think it would be a big deal at the time. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't hold back the sarcasm that slipped out. "You didn't know? Really? You didn't think charging $185,000 in someone else's card was a problem?" "I was selfish. I wasn't thinking clearly," she replied, her voice cracking. "But I swear, I'm going to make it right. I'll work hard to pay you back. I'll find a way." I crossed my arms, trying to mask the swirl of emotions inside me. I wanted to scream, but something in her tone made me pause. She seemed different. She seemed genuine. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her yet, but I was willing to give her a chance. "You have to do more than just apologize, Emma," I said. "Words don't mean much when you've hurt someone like this. You're going to have to prove that you're serious about making things right. You're going to have to show me that you can take responsibility for your actions." She nodded, her eyes pleading. "I will. I promise." I didn't know if I believed her completely, but for the first time, I felt like she might actually be trying. Maybe it wasn't too late for her. Maybe there was still a chance for us to rebuild, even if it would take time. We sat there for a while, not speaking. The weight between us was heavy, but at least it felt like we were finally on the same page, like there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't all lost. Later that night, I finished packing my things. The next day, I signed the lease for my new apartment. I was finally free. I didn't know if I could ever go back to how things were, or if I should. But one thing was clear. I was no longer going to be the person who carried everything on my own. I wasn't going to be anyone's emotional crutch anymore. As I moved out, my heart was torn. I was leaving behind everything I had ever known, but at the same time, I was finally reclaiming my own life. The air outside felt different, fresher, cleaner. There was something about taking this step that made me feel alive again. But even with all this freedom, there was still Emma. There was still the unfinished business between us. Would she stick to her word? Would she prove that she could change? Only time would tell. I settled into my new apartment a week later, and it felt surreal. I had spent so many years living in that house, carrying the weight of my family's struggles, That being alone for the first time in forever felt like a strange luxury. The quiet was comforting. No more tense silences after work. No more pretending that everything was okay. I was starting fresh. But as much as I relished the silence, a part of me still couldn't shake the guilt. My family wasn't just going to forget about me moving out. They never did. And Emma was still out there trying to prove she was sorry. But how long could that last? I had no idea. She'd hurt me in ways I couldn't just forget. Yet, a small part of me hoped she meant it. Maybe I was being naive. I kept telling myself that leaving was the right thing to do. I needed to live for me, to rebuild my own life, free of their expectations, their demands. But still, every time my phone buzzed, I couldn't help but wonder if it was Emma reaching out again. I ignored most of her messages, but one evening, as I sat in my cozy little apartment, sipping coffee and flipping through a magazine, I got a text that made me pause. "Sophie, I need to talk. It's important. Can you come over?" I hesitated. I had my own life now, my own space, and I was finally in control of my time. But I couldn't completely shut Emma out. Not yet. Not after everything. Against my better judgment, I called her back. "What's going on?" There was a long pause on the other end before she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot, Sophie, and I'm ready to pay you back. I know I messed up, but I've been saving up. I'm working 2 jobs now. I'm doing everything I can to make things right." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to believe it. "Emma, you've said all this before, but you didn't do anything. You spent all that money, and now you want me to just trust you again? I know. I don't deserve your trust. I've been selfish. I've been irresponsible. But I swear to you, I'm trying to change. I don't want to keep being that person. I want to prove it to you." I closed my eyes, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how every time I tried to trust her, she let me down. But another part of me, the part that remembered the little sister I used to love, felt a pang of hope. Maybe Emma was trying. Maybe this was the turning point. "Okay," I said, exhaling deeply. "I'll come over. But this time, Emma, you better show me that you mean it. No more empty promises." I hung up, not sure whether I was making the right decision. I stood there for a moment, staring out my apartment window at the city below. What was I even doing? Why was I still trying to fix something that seemed irreparable? I had my own life now. Why did I feel so drawn back into that mess? I couldn't answer those questions, but I knew one thing: I wasn't ready to give up on her just yet. When I arrived at my parents' house, it felt strange. The familiar smell of home, too many people, too many memories hit me as soon as I stepped inside. The place hadn't changed at all. Same old couch, same old kitchen, but there was a shift in the air. Things were different now, and I could feel it. Emma was sitting on the couch when I walked in. She stood up immediately, her face full of regret. "Sophie," she said almost breathlessly. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to start. I didn't know what to say." Part of me wanted to say, "Don't bother," but I bit my tongue. Instead, I sat down, crossing my arms. I wanted to hear her out. I owed her that much, even if I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. She sat down next to me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I've been saving up," she continued. "I'm almost halfway to paying you back the full amount. It's not much, but it's all I can do for now. I just want to make things right." I looked at her, trying to hold back the surge of emotions that threatened to take over. "You think paying me back is going to make up for everything?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No," she said quickly, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me just like that. But I'm trying. I'm trying, Sophie. I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forget it. I want to show you that I can be better." For the first time in a long time, I looked at Emma and saw something different. Not the selfish, entitled little sister I used to know, but someone who was genuinely trying to take responsibility for her actions. Maybe it wasn't enough yet. Maybe it would never be enough to make up for everything. But in that moment, I saw her truly saw her, and I felt something shift inside me. "Okay," I said, my voice softer now. "I'm not saying I forgive you. Not yet. But I'll watch. I'll see if you can stick to your word." She nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. I will. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this was the start of something better or if Emma was just going to disappoint me again. But I had to try. I had to let her try. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything between us hanging in the air. Then I heard Mom's voice from the kitchen calling us to dinner. It was the same, old routine, but for once, I wasn't dreading it. As I sat down at the table with my family that night, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't carrying all the burdens anymore. Maybe I'd never fully forgive Emma or my parents for what they'd done, but that was okay. I had to take care of myself first. And maybe, just maybe there was room for healing after all. It's strange how much can change in such a short time. A few months ago, I would have never imagined that I'd be sitting in this apartment alone, free, and finally feeling like I could breathe. But here I was, in my own space, my own sanctuary, looking back on everything that had happened. I wasn't exactly where I wanted to be yet, but I was getting there. The road ahead was still uncertain, but at least I could see a path forward now. Emma had kept her word, more or less. She'd worked hard to pay me back, little by little. It wasn't an easy road for her, but there were no shortcuts, and I appreciated that. I saw her showing up for herself in ways I hadn't thought possible. She was serious about making amends, not just with me, but with everyone she'd let down. There was something raw about watching her struggle to rebuild her life, and it reminded me of the strength I had to find in myself. There were still days when I would hear from her texts, calls, little check-ins to let me know she was doing okay. Sometimes I'd respond, and sometimes I wouldn't. I didn't owe her anything anymore, but I also knew that healing took time. My heart wasn't a switch that could be flipped just because she was doing better. One night, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I was sitting on my couch, flicking through channels mindlessly, when I got a call from Mom. She never called unless it was important. I didn't know if I was ready for another emotional conversation, but I picked up anyway. "Hey, Sophie." Her voice was soft, a little hesitant. "Can we talk for a minute?" I sat up straight, feeling the familiar sense of unease creep up. "Sure, what's going on?" "Your father and I were talking," she began, her tone tinged with uncertainty. "And we just wanted to apologize for everything. We've taken you for granted for so long, and we didn't realize how much you were carrying. We should have done better, and I should have been more supportive." I felt a lump in my throat. I had spent so long being angry at them, at their unwillingness to change, to recognize the pressure they were putting on me. But hearing Mom say those words, hearing her admit their mistakes, stirred something inside me, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I don't expect anything from you, Mom," I said quietly, the words more vulnerable than I intended. "But I appreciate that. I really do." She sighed, almost like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie. I just want you to know that it was a small thing, but it meant everything." For the first time in a long time, I felt like my parents saw me not as a lifeline, but as their daughter, the one they loved, not the one they depended on. After that conversation, something shifted. I wasn't sure if it was because they had finally realized their mistakes or if it was just the natural course of time, but things were starting to feel different. Emma, too, seemed to be on a path of real change. She had stuck to her promise of paying me back, working hard, saving every penny she could. A few weeks ago, she sent me a message that made my heart swell a little. "I've saved enough to pay you back in full. It's been a long road, but I want you to know that I've done this because I respect you. I won't ever take you for granted again." It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, the realization that actions speak louder than words. She was proving herself not to me, but to herself. That day, I decided to meet her. We went for a walk in the park near my apartment, the same park we used to go to when we were kids. The air was fresh, and the sound of children playing echoed in the distance. It felt like a normal day, a far cry from the chaos that had once defined our relationship. "I'm proud of you, Emma," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "for everything you've done. It's not easy, but you've been working hard." "I see that," she smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I've messed up so much, Sophie. I've hurt you, and I can't undo it. but I'll keep working to prove that I can be better. You don't have to prove anything to me, I said, turning to face her. You've already shown me enough. It's about you now. What you do next is what matters. For the first time, I truly believed her. Not because of the money, not because of her promises, but because I saw the effort behind her words. Emma wasn't the same person she was a year ago. She was growing, learning, becoming someone I could finally respect again. As we walked, the weight of everything that had happened between us seemed to lift. Just a little. There was still so much work to do, but I felt a small, quiet hope building inside me. Maybe it was possible to heal these old wounds. Maybe we could find a way back to each other, not as sisters who had been torn apart by selfishness, but as two people who had learned from their mistakes. That evening, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened. I had spent so long carrying the weight of my family's problems, but now it felt like I was finally letting go of some of that weight. I had my own life to live, and for the first time, it felt like I was living it for me. I wasn't carrying the burden of their mistakes anymore. I wasn't being their crutch. I was standing on my own 2 feet, and that was enough. As the city lights flickered on below, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But maybe, just maybe, I had the power to shape it into something that worked for me. And in that moment, I realized that this was just the beginning. A new chapter was opening, not just for me, but for all of us. Story 2, greetings from our yearly harvest festival. With a voice that reverberated throughout the adorned barn at River Edge Vineyard, my father made the announcement. Our family is having a very exciting day today. We are pleased to announce that Karen, who just received her MBA, will assume the role of CEO. As I sat motionless with my wine glass halfway to my lips, the audience applauded. I had sacrificed everything I had saved to keep my vineyard from going into foreclosure 7 months ago. I now saw my younger sister emerge, looking stunning in her high-end gown. Someone who has never been in the fields for a day. I'm Mary, and I'm 36 years old. I started my investment consultancy business from scratch. Without ever requesting assistance from my parents, I worked hard to make it a success. I worked 72-hour weeks to understand what success truly meant, while Karen's parents paid for her MBA in full. I didn't think twice when my parents contacted me in tears 7 months ago regarding the bank's foreclosure notice. I sent $900,000. We're family, therefore I had everything. My father went on to say, they told me they trusted me with her business, education, and fresh ideas. River's Edge will enter a new age under Karen's leadership. She possesses the ideal balance of education and knowledge of our family's history. I observed Karen taking in the cheers. This was the same sister who, rather of studying soil or winemaking during her undergraduate years, spent her time at the vineyard taking photos. The same sister who was blind tasting and couldn't distinguish between our Cabernet and Merlot only last Christmas. My mom gave me a gentle pat on the arm. I hope you get it, Mary, honey. Karen is the greatest option on the business side because of her degree. Before she could say anything further, I interrupted her with a kind grin. Karen will perform great, of course, Mom. For a toast, I raised my glass. My chest constricted with frustration, but I maintained a steady tone of speech. To River's Edge's new CEO, I excused myself after that. I pulled out my phone and went out into the crisp evening air. I never imagined that I would need this contact, so I navigated to it. I had met Betty Frieden, a strong corporate lawyer, at several wine business gatherings. Regarding a family business matter, I require your assistance. Are you available to meet tomorrow? I texted you, she responded quickly. 9 a.m. AT, my workplace. Bring any papers you may have. High above downtown Las Vegas. I sat across from Betty in her office the following morning. She looked over my bank records, which included the $900,000 I had deposited to River's Edge Vineyard, as sunlight bounced off the big glass skyscrapers. She raised her head. Let me clarify. Without a formal contract, you entrusted them all of your life savings, not even a promissory note. No contract. They are my relatives, I said, but suddenly the words were bitter. My one concern when they contacted regarding the foreclosure was preserving our family's heritage. After taking out too many debts to finance Karen's MBA and a brand new tasting room, 3 generations of winemakers were on the verge of going out of business. They need it, she said. They made Betty CEO, and she sat back in her chair. She hesitated, even though your money had saved the vineyard. Describe the specific promises they made to you when you sent the funds. I closed my eyes and recalled that frantic call. My father had assured me that I would be well taken care of and that my investment would guarantee my position in the family company. They'll make it up to me, Mom said in tears. With a rise in rage, I opened my eyes. They now pretend, however, that it was simply my obligation as their daughter. Were these exchanges observed by anyone? Betty inquired. I straightened my posture. Indeed. When I set up the transfer, Timothy, their accountant, was present. He kept stressing that we should put something in writing, as if he was uncomfortable about it. He was shut down by my parents, who said it would be disrespectful to the family's trust. Betty's gaze brightened. Timothy may be of great assistance. Tell me what you truly want first, though. Would you like to run the vineyard? I gave a headshake. No, I want my money returned. With curiosity. Karen can continue to serve as CEO. With that money, I'll establish my own vineyard, one with which they will have to contend. Betty grinned. Excellent. According to Betty, I have a plan. With Timothy's evidence and these bank records, your parents' conduct qualify as verbal fraud. We have a compelling argument, but we will begin with a demand letter rather than immediately bringing a lawsuit. She reached for a notebook. How their acts can be seen as financial manipulation will be explained in detail in the letter. Within 28 days, we will demand that you refund your $900,000 plus 10% yearly interest. All financial documents from the time of your investment will also be requested. We'll probably discover some intriguing choices they made after receiving your money. A burden was lifted off my shoulders. What if they say no? I inquired. Betty smiled a little. We then file a lawsuit. This will compel businesses to make their financial documents publicly available. Her sister's MBA didn't seem to have equipped her for crisis management like that, in my opinion. Like a bomb, the demand letter struck the river's edge. Karen called when I was working for my flat. Her voice was frightened and high-pitched. A lawsuit. Are you insane? She said. You're going to destroy everything our family has worked so hard to build. You're to blame for Dad's chest troubles. I remained composed and let her vent. The answer is straightforward, I added. Give me interest back on my investment. $900,000 plus 10% over a 7-month period. Do you own an MBA? Do the maths, Karen? This vineyard was preserved by that money. Your heritage as well. And now you want to take it back by bankrupting us? Her tone changed as she hesitated. Additionally, you should be aware of the complexity of verbal agreements in family enterprises. Nothing can be proven by you. She couldn't see me smile, but I did. In fact, I just hung up with Timothy on the phone. Do you recall him? Your bookkeeper? Regarding the day I made the transfer, he provided a sworn statement. He told me how Dad guaranteed me a safe spot in the company and how he suggested that we put our agreement in paper. Then there was quiet. Wait a moment. Dad would like to speak with you. Anger was evident in my father's voice. What are you doing to us, Mary? Following everything that we have done for you. I interrupted him. All that you have done for me, let's discuss it. Karen's flat vehicle and MBA were all paid for by you. I created my own life in the interim. You promised me a future here, and it was the only thing I ever asked for. He retaliated when I preserved this vineyard, saying, We never promised you control. Karen is qualified for this. I am no longer requesting control. I interrupted him once again. I want my money returned. Money that you took with a clear purpose for its use. His voice shifted, softening. My dear, be sensible. At the moment, the vineyard does not have that type of money. We would need to get another loan. Then you should start corresponding with banks. Before I filed the case, I gave you 22 days. And, Father, we'll review every financial choice you've made since my investment, including the vacation you and Mom took to Rome last month, and Karen's new Mercedes. In the background, I could hear muted voices. Then my mom answered the phone. Please, Mary, she pleaded. Join us for supper. As a family, we can discuss this. Mom, we're not family at the moment. In a quarrel, we are business associates. With your response, have your lawyer give Betty a call. My hands were trembling a little as I hung up. Messages from family members, some of whom were furious and others begging for peace, instantly filled my phone. Disregarding them all, I launched my laptop. I began looking at the neighboring county's potential vineyard lands. River's Edge would soon face serious competition. A week later, I received an unexpected call. The accountant for the vineyard, Timothy, wanted to get coffee. His tone was intense and tight. A modest cafe outside the vineyard is where we first met. He came with a heavy folder in his hand. "Something has to be seen by you." After looking around, he remarked and passed the folder across the table. "Since your investment, I have been evaluating the books. The figures are not consistent." I pulled out a folder. Comprehensive financial records were contained therein. Timothy indicated a number of entries that were highlighted. He remarked, "Your $900,000 did more than just keep the vineyard out of foreclosure. Personal expenses that were recorded as company expenses were also reimbursed. Listed as a delivery vehicle was the Mercedes. Some of the charges were backdated as employee education fees, and the road trips included market research and even Karen's MBA." I held on to my coffee cup. "All of this was done with my money." Timothy nodded, his face serious. "There's more." A new firm, River's Edge Holdings LLC, was registered 3 weeks prior to Karen being appointed CEO. They've been transferring vineyard assets to this new business in secret. The first vineyard? The one you put money into. They're draining it. It will soon be useless. I felt as though I had been punched in the gut by the realization. They weren't just ignoring what I had to say. They were ensuring that I had nothing to claim. Soon, the vineyard I had rescued would be reduced to a mere shell. Timothy spoke more softly. "This must be seen by your attorney." "But I didn't give it to you. I've already started seeking for work," Timothy said. "I can't be involved in this kind of financial mess." My phone rang with a text from Karen before I could reach for it to contact Betty. "Tonight is a family gathering. Don't bring your attorney along. This is your last chance to correct it. Similar to family." I presented the message to Timothy. He gave a head shake. "They must be aware that I have been looking through the documents. They will attempt to coerce you into resigning or threaten me as well." I let out a sigh, recalling similar family gatherings from our childhood. Our parents always managed to place the blame on me, making me the irrational one, for failing to protect my sister whenever Karen got into trouble. I responded to the text. "Any conversation must take place with solicitors present." Karen's response was prompt. "You have a choice, but when things get ugly, don't come crying." I gave Betty a call and emailed her pictures of Timothy's paperwork. I could tell everything from the sharp intake of breath on the other end. She said, "This is just what I needed. They have committed grave financial offenses. We are now considering more than just a civil case. Criminal charges could result from this. I'd rather they weren't incarcerated." "Quickly," I said. "All I want is my money returned." Then Betty said, "We use this as leverage. Instead of 28 days, I'm sending a revised demand letter. They have 55 hours to give you your money back, plus interest. Or we launch a thorough inquiry that might include the SEC. They have a choice." I hung up and sat looking at the documents in the cafe long after Timothy had gone. The thought of what this might do to my family made me feel bad. But another part, the part that remembered every time they ignored me, every time they put Karen first, every sacrifice I made for them, felt a quiet satisfaction. My phone kept buzzing with frantic messages from my parents and Karen. I ignore them all and open my laptop. Pulling up a real estate listing, I had been eyeing Marshall Creek Vineyard. 300 acres of perfect vineyard land just across the valley from River's Edge. Great soil, ideal sun exposure, and most importantly, a clear view of my family's vineyard. The new demand letter hit them like a hailstorm on harvest day. I was in the middle of a virtual tour of the Marshall Creek property when my apartment door flew open. My father stormed in, waving the letter like a surrender flag. His face was red. Criminal charges he raised against his own family. "I raised you better than this." I minimized the browser window showing the Marshall Creek property. "Did you raise me to accept being robbed? Because that's what you did. You took my $900,000 and spent it on luxury cars and vacations. while secretly pushing me out of the business. We never met. My father started, but I cut him off. Save it. I've seen the financial records, the new LLC, the asset transfers, everything. You didn't just betray me. You made sure I couldn't fight back. I stood up, my voice steady. You have 45 hours to return my investment with interest, or Betty files everything with the SEC. His face turned from red to pale. You'd ruin your sister's future. She just became CEO. I let out a bitter laugh. Karen's future. What about mine? I earned that money while she was busy posting Instagram pictures from business school. You promised that money would secure my place in the family business. We can still work something out, he pleaded. Maybe Karen could share the CEO position with you. A leadership arrangement? I gave a headshake. I don't want to share leadership with Karen. I want my money returned. Every penny plus interest. Then you'll never have to worry about me competing with your precious CEO again. His eyes narrowed. Competing? What does that signify? Just then, my phone buzzed. It was the real estate agent handling Marshall Creek. Perfect timing. I answered on speaker. Hi, Mary. Great news. The owner is very interested in your offer. They love your vision for expanding the vineyard's production. When can you meet to discuss terms? I watched my father's face crumble as the truth hit him. Marshall Creek wasn't just any property. It used to be River's Edge, his biggest competition. Back when my grandfather ran things, their wines won more awards until the owner retired and let the vineyard decline. You wouldn't, my father whispered. Wouldn't what? I inquired. Start my own vineyard. Compete with the business that stole from me. I looked him in the eye. I learned everything about winemaking from Grandpa. Dad. Everything. While Karen was studying business cases, I was studying soil samples and weather patterns. My father shot back. Your grandfather would be ashamed. He was trying one last emotional jab. I met his eyes. No, he'd be proud. Proud that I'm not letting you and Karen ruin his legacy with your greed. I turned back to my laptop. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a property to buy TikTok on that 45 hour. He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. Within minutes, my phone exploded with messages from Karen. How dare you threaten Dad like this? You're just jealous of my achievement. Mom's sobbing because of you. I blocked her phone and returned to the Marshall Creek listing. The property required renovation, but I could see its potential. More significantly, its premium fruits and greater elevation would allow me to develop wines that could directly compete with River's Edge's bestsellers. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Betty. They're panicking, she added. I recently got a call from their lawyer. Looks like they're scrambling to acquire an emergency loan. I grinned. Either way, I won. Either I got my money back, or I got Marshall Creek and River's Edge would finally feel what true competition felt like. With 15 hours remaining until the deadline, my mother showed up at my office. She held a big manila envelope and wore the same worn face she had whenever she tried to make peace with Karen and me as kids. She settled into the chair opposite from my desk. It was necessary to sedate your father. He had extremely high blood pressure. Are you content now? I maintained a neutral expression. Mom, what's in the envelope? She moved it across the desk. Our finest effort. We put all we could into a mortgage. This sum is $700,000. The bank would only give us that. The remaining amount can be paid in installments. I kept my hands off the envelope. The bargain wasn't that. In addition to interest, $900,000. Everything. Or tomorrow morning, Betty files the documents. Her communication mask broke. We don't possess it. She lost her temper. Karen has been contacting all of Nevada's banks, but none of them are willing to extend our loan without first auditing the accounts. And, given what they would discover, we cannot permit that. I inquired subtly about things like how you've been transferring assets into that new LLC and how you use my money to fund Karen's MBA rather than preserving the vineyard. Mom's face became white. How did you? Mom, I've got copies of everything, each and every transfer transaction and fictitious business expenditure. You honestly believe that nobody would notice? She bent over. She spoke more softly now. Consider what you are doing. It won't only harm us if you follow through on this. The reputation of the vineyard will be ruined. The distributors, the employees, and their families, They are all dependent on us. To exact revenge on Karen, you will destroy them. I tightened my jaw. You have no right to throw this on me. As soon as you determined to steal my money, you and your father made this decision. I spoke aggressively. It's not me that jeopardizes everyone's employment, but you. We didn't steal. Mom began, but I interrupted her. I'll show you something. I rotated my laptop so that the Marshall Creek real estate listing was visible. Lovely. Is it not? Enough acreage to double rivers, perfect soil, and high height. Edges, manufacturing. Tomorrow morning, the owner accepts my offer. Unless I first receive my money back. Mom recognized the place, and her eyes grew wide. That land is not yours. We would be destroyed. In the next 13 hours, you and Karen need to come up with something innovative. Sell her a Mercedes. Mortgage the home. Request favors. How you do it doesn't matter to me. However, I want my money refunded in full. She got up unsteadily. Mary, you've changed. You've hardened. Cruel. I gave a headshake. I simply stopped allowing you to control me, Mom. The lawsuit or the money, you have no other choice. I contacted Betty to give her an update after she departed. They made an effort to bargain. I informed her and made a half-payment offer. Remain steadfast, Betty suggested. They're desperate, based on what I've been told. All day long, their lawyer has been phoning banks. At that moment, I received a fresh email from the Marshall Creek realtor owner, who was ready to close. Can get together tomorrow morning to sign documents. I confirmed the meeting with a smile. 13 hours remained when I texted Karen. Talk. She responded right away. You're making a grave error. We might spend years in court, according to Dad's attorney. I returned one picture. The view of the river's borders from the highest point in Marshall Creek, Principal Vineyard. It would be familiar to her from all of her Instagram picture sessions. She replied with a series of irate emoticons. I had them precisely where I wanted them, and time was running out. I sat in Betty's office going over the Marshall Creek purchase agreement and the SEC filing, the last documents for both scenarios, with 3 hours to go before the deadline. Like our Cabernet, the sky was painted a rich crimson as the sun sank over Las Vegas. Betty looked at her phone. In the last hour, their solicitors have made 5 calls. They're rushing. Ronald Reagan from First Regional Bank has also been attempting to get in touch with you. I straightened my posture. Karen's ex-husband, Ronald Reagan, the one who left her because she was too fussy. Now he worked as a loan officer. Before I could reply, Timothy, the accountant, texted me on my phone. River's Edge emergency board meeting. Karen is in the bathroom sobbing. If your father doesn't correct this, your mother is threatening to reveal anything about him. Chaos reigns. I let out a slow breath. Excellent. I gave Ronald a call. He responded immediately. According to him, the vineyard's records reveal significant issues. Without a thorough audit, I am unable to authorize their emergency loan. However, there is an alternative. A bank that wants to put money into family-run vineyards. Your parents would get more than simply a loan, but they would want complete openness. I sent my dad an SMS. A solution exists. One that's not about the SEC or myself. At First Regional, give Ronald Reagan a call. You have 100 minutes. Karen's reaction was immediate. Do you believe that allowing a bank take control is preferable than family? The heritage of Grandpa is being destroyed by you. I had Grandpa on my mind. He taught me about the vines for hours. I recalled his final words to me while Karen browsed through her phone. Jesse, expensive degrees are irrelevant to the grapes. They value hard effort and affection. With 2 hours remaining, Betty whispered softly, Now what? Timothy's updates became more frequent as the deadline drew near. Your dad is working with the bank to review documentation. 3 separate loan officials were contacted by Karen. Your mother has used half of the tissues in the box. I waited with my phone close at hand. Money was no longer the only factor in this. It was about holding them accountable for their deeds. Across from me, Betty worked silently to prepare both sets of documents. Then my screen displayed my father's number. The bank desires complete authority over financial choices. For 6 years, he added in a harsh voice. In addition, we would be answering to strangers in 3 board seats. Strangers are preferable to thieves. I gave a chilly response. You have 15 minutes. He let out a sigh. Will you abandon everything else if we do this and allow the bank to take control? Not a second. No, rival vineyard. I leaned forward and made a bank sign. I'll walk away if you return my investment plus interest. I will never again compete with Karen, so you don't need to worry. He remained quiet for a while. According to your mother, we ought to call your bluff. Claims that you're too soft and won't actually approach the SEC. I looked at the time. 10 minutes to find out. Talk. I turned to Betty after hanging up. Prepare the SEC documentation prior to her grabbing the file. It buzzed on my phone. Ronald Reagan's email, signed subject documents. I clicked on the attachment. The bank agreement was signed by my parents, a confirmation of the $900,000 transfer to my account, plus interest. Betty grinned. It appears that they put survival before pride. I pulled up another real estate listing and nodded already. There had been a recent sale of a vineyard across the valley from Marshall Creek. Improved rights to water, reduced cost. I was standing on my freshly acquired farm 3 months later. A vineyard in Sunset Valley. Ideal exposure in the west. The view of the river's edge over the valley and the rich land. As an added bonus. I make a down payment with the $900,000 stat was refunded. When I told investors about my intentions, they were excited to help fund my new vineyard. The day after the bank took over, Timothy left River's Edge, and I recruited him as my CFO right away. He gave his phone a quick look. Karen is losing her mind. Her idea for a new tasting room was turned down by the bank. They mentioned cutting back on wasteful spending and emphasizing wine quality. I grinned, recalling the first board meeting of the bank. The pricey Italian wine tasting excursions had been canceled, and the elegant Mercedes had been swapped out for a useful truck. Now that she had actual financial responsibility, Karen's MBA was not really assisting her. Every week, my mother continued to text about mending the family. I choose to disregard them. Since he signed the bank deal, my father had not communicated with me. However, I got a box last week that was more significant than an apology. Grandpa's ancient leather notebook with handwritten notes on grape types, soil, and weather was inside. There was a little letter inside. Someone who recognizes its worth should own this. Dad. 4 years later, I stood in my vineyard with the notepad in my hands. It would be 6 years before these vines would provide their first vintage. River's Edge would be my direct rival, but I no longer need their consent. I had something superior. I have to leave my own legacy. Timothy gave the workers a nod as they waited with the fresh rootstock prepared for planting. Grandpa's notes was tucked into my jacket. We should prepare some wine. Story 3, I'm Emma, and at 38, I'm going to tell you a story that fundamentally altered my views on love, family, and responsibility. My family wasn't rich while I was growing up, but we made ends meet. My dad continued working while he counted down the years until his own retirement, but my mom had to retire early owing to health concerns. 2 more to go. Evelyn, my younger sister, came next. The undisputed favorite in our parents' eyes, 13 years younger than I am. After graduating from college, I found a steady job and moved in with Henry, my boyfriend. Like me, he was sensible and pragmatic, which is probably why we got along so well. I was already establishing my profession and planning for the future of our family, while Evelyn was still completing her degree. You don't need to continue sending them money, you know. Henry used to repeat this anytime he witnessed me moving money into my parents' account. They are also grown-ups. Every time they needed assistance, I would shake my head. Henry, their home is collapsing. I have no children. Additionally, this is how I check on them. The ancient, dilapidated 2-story house where I was raised was starting to cause major problems. You could see sunshine through the large fractures in the walls. During the winter, the heating seldom functioned, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. In the hopes of receiving positive feedback, I ultimately engaged a contractor to examine it. Rather, I received a sobering reminder of reality. The contractor shook his head as he went through each area. It would be more expensive to fix this place than to create a new one. MAAM. He drew attention to the structural hazards, the weakened base, and the water damage. You would be wasting your money. I made a choice at that point that, at the time, seemed very reasonable. I devised a strategy and opened a joint savings account with my parents. Set aside $210,000. Combine it with the proceeds from the sale of the old house to provide them with a secure and cozy retirement home. I placed a sizable portion of my paycheck into that account each month. I saw the balance gradually increase. Each milestone of $60,000, $110,000, and more brought me one step closer to providing them with the security they were due. Henry and I had a simple life. No new vehicles, no lavish holidays. We even postponed purchasing our own home. I didn't mind though. Family came first, right? Then, on a fairly typical Friday night, everything changed. We were all together for a family meal. The air outdoors was filled with the soothing smell of Mom's pot roast. Light rain pattered across the glass. Evelyn cleared her throat, grabbing everyone's attention, although it was one of those cozy, comfortable moments. Her eyes gleamed with enthusiasm, and she looked radiant. She held out her left hand and said, "Scott and I are getting married." The light fell on a huge diamond ring that was easily worth more than my whole yearly wage. With a shock, Mom sprung from her chair and gave Evelyn a close hug. Dad smiled proudly. And me? I felt something as I sat there and stared at the ring. Change. Something that had been buried behind years of family love, sacrifice, and obligation. Because I suddenly realized that perhaps I had been mistaken all along. I was pleased for Evelyn. Very pleased. She was well treated by Scott, who came from a good family. Together, they appeared to be ideal. But everything changed when she revealed a bombshell. Evelyn pulled out her phone and said, "I've planned it all out." She showed us an elaborate wedding-themed Pinterest board. Everything: the dress, the flowers, the location. The approximate cost is $380,000. I choked on my $380,000 worth of water. Certain that I had misheard, I repeated, "Evelyn, that's absurd." There was silence in the room. Dad and Mom looked at one another awkwardly. Evelyn just gave me a look I had never seen her make before. As if it were only fair, as if she had anticipated this. Scott suggested doing something more modest. She waved her hand as if it made no difference. "Only close friends and relatives." I informed him, however, that I could pay for it myself. "We are just as good as his family, and I want them to realize that." I gazed at her. "And how precisely are you going to cover this?" She gave a charming smile. "Are you going to assist me?" "Naturally. You have always supported your family." The quiet was overwhelming. I looked at my parents, expecting them to say something, to tell Evelyn that her behavior was absurd. Dad found his coffee all of a sudden, but Mom merely gazed at her dish. "Very intriguing." I inhaled deeply. "I am able to provide you with $30,000 for the wedding," I spoke slowly, "with a donation of an additional $20,000. Evelyn, that's already a lot." Her smile vanished. Her expression clouded. "That's insufficient!" she yelled. "Emma, you've got far more than that." This is my one opportunity to have the wedding of my dreams, to demonstrate to Scott's family that I'm not some destitute girl they can despise. With a hint of irritation and despair in my voice, I turned to our parents. "Tell her this is ridiculous, Mom and Dad. Remind her that she has nothing to prove to anybody." Mom sighed after hesitating. "Honey, maybe Evelyn is right. We were unable to provide her with much upbringing. Her special day is something she deserves." My gut felt like it was being punched. Evelyn grinned. "All you're feeling is jealousy. Feeling envious?" Stunned, I repeated. "I'm envious that I'm marrying first. Envious of Scott's family's wealth. Want to attend the wedding but are jealous? You couldn't." I tightened my jaw. If I wanted to, I could have a large wedding. Evelyn, but not like you. Suddenly, everything between us was different. I know how much money is worth. Henry and I plan to have a modest wedding and save our money for important things when we get married, like creating a future and having children. Angry, Evelyn's cheeks flushed. She got to her feet and yelled, "You're so self-centered, my God, pretending to know everything at all times. You're simply self-centered and avaricious." Tears were burning in my eyes as I reached for my handbag. "I'm avaricious," I fired back. "I've been helping my parents by contributing half of my pay. You've been busy figuring out how to spend money that doesn't belong to you." I heard my mother calling after me as I bounded out into the rain, but I didn't turn around. I tried to convince myself that this was just a bad fight and that Evelyn would wake up once she calmed down as I drove home in a daze. However, I was mistaken. 3 weeks after that terrible dinner, I was going over my budget at my desk during lunch. After I made my regular deposit into my parents' account, I wanted to make sure I had enough saved up for dinner with Henry after work. My heart stopped when I clicked on the joint account after logging into my online banking. There was $1 left over. I clicked on the transaction history with trembling hands. A single withdrawal of $160,000 made only 4 days prior was there. I didn't even tell my boss why I was leaving work. As I drove to my parents' house, I was having trouble thinking. My knuckles went white as my fingers tightened their hold on the steering wheel. There must be another reason, something different from what I was afraid of. After I entered the driveway, there were both of their vehicles. I made no attempt to knock. I pushed the door open with my old key. The kitchen was where they were. Where is the money? I insisted. My voice trembled. Mom winced. Dad refused to give me a look. What became of the account's $160,000? Mom's gaze remained fixed on the ground. Dodd gazed at his cup of coffee. The same as 3 weeks ago at dinner. Honey, we have no idea what you're talking about, Mom said softly. Don't lie to me, I shouted, pulling out my phone. The money was taken 4 days ago. All of it. If you didn't do it, then I'm calling the police. Mom gasped and reached for my phone. No, she said quickly. Don't call the police. I took it, Mom admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn needed it for the wedding. She's marrying into a good family. We couldn't let her have a small wedding. What would they think? I let out a short, bitter laugh. What would they think? They'd think she's marrying their son because she loves him, not because she's trying to impress them with my money. Mom reached out, trying to calm me down. It's going to be fine. Evelyn promised she'll help us buy a new house after the wedding. Once she's married to Scott, they'll have plenty of money. She already said she'll send us money every month. I stared at her, shocked. Are you even listening to yourselves? We had $160,000 saved for a new house. We only needed $60,000 more, and you could have finally moved out of this place before it collapses. Instead, you gave it all away for a party, a one-day event. It's not just a party, Dodd argued. It's an investment in Evelyn's future. You don't understand. Once she's married to Scott. I looked around the kitchen, taking in the cracked walls, the sagging ceiling, the water stains in the corners, all things that could have been fixed. But now they would never be fixed because my parents chose a fantasy over reality. You know what? I said, suddenly feeling exhausted. You're right. I don't understand and I don't want to understand. You made your choice. Now you can live with it. That night I barely slept. Henry held me while I cried. Then help me make a plan. First thing in the morning, I closed the joint account and opened a new one, in my name only. Then I called Evelyn. She picked up after the 5th ring, sounding annoyingly cheerful. Oh, hi Emma. I was just looking at wedding venues. There's this amazing place. Cut the crap, Evelyn, I interrupted. I know what you did. I know about the money. There was a brief silence. Then her voice turned cold. If Mom and Dad gave me the money, that's their decision. You're not in charge of them. Give it back, I said through gritted teeth. Give it back now, or I swear to God, Evelyn. Or what? She snapped. You'll call the police? Go ahead. Mom withdrew it legally, so there's nothing you can do. Honestly, Emma, you should be happy for me. This is my dream wedding. I could barely believe what I was hearing. Your dream wedding? I spat. What about Mom and Dad's dream of having a safe home? Did you even think about that? Evelyn scoffed. Oh, please. They'll be fine once I'm married to Scott. I'll buy them whatever they need. His family has ties. We can probably get them a house for considerably less than market value. And at that instant, I understood Evelyn had never cared about anyone but herself. I gave out a sour laugh. You genuinely believe that, don't you? That marrying into money will miraculously fix all your troubles. There was quiet on the other end of the phone. What did you tell Scott about where this money came from? I inquired. She didn't answer. He doesn't know, does he? I pushed. You told him you had the money. Does he have any knowledge you stole it from our parents' house fund? I didn't steal anything, Evelyn shouted. You know what? Don't come to the wedding. Anyhow, I don't want you there. Most likely, your envy and I'm better than everyone mentality would attempt to spoil it. I hardly responded to her hateful remarks. I reflected on all that I had done for her. When she was between jobs, I helped her pay the rent and the college textbooks. She was obviously forgetting all the small details. "Evelyn, do you realize what separates us?" Silently, I said. "When I get married, I'll be able to look my spouse in the eye and know that I never lied to him about money." "I don't need a $380,000 wedding to establish my value," she laughed. "In any case, the florist and I are meeting. Don't give me another call." She hung up after that. I sat there looking at my phone for a long time. I couldn't help but think of all the times I stood up for Evelyn when Henry called her spoiled. I always excused her because I believed she was still young and would outgrow it. When Henry got home from work, he saw me sitting there. "Have you spoken to her?" Gently, he inquired. I gave a nod. "She used it for all non-refundable deposits and reservations." "What about your parents?" "After the wedding, they still think she would look after them," I said with a dry chuckle that wasn't quite a laugh. It resembled a sob more. "They really believe that once Sarah marries Scott, she would purchase a home for them." Henry took a seat next to me. "What are you interested in doing?" "Nothing," I remarked, astonished at how at ease I felt. "Nothing has to be done." They made up their minds. The three of them. They now have to cope with it. In the months after that altercation, I concentrated on my personal life. I poured myself into my job and started making plans for Henry and myself. We began saving for a down payment after seeing a little but lovely home that we adored. Mom's sister, Aunt Madison, who continued to communicate with both sides of our now separated family, told me about Evelyn's wedding arrangements. Madison told me over coffee one day, "You're not going to believe how extravagant this wedding is. Just the outfit alone cost $40,000. At the event, she is releasing doves. What about the cake?" Real gold leaf covers 5 levels. I just gave a head shake, not able to speak. I became aware that I no longer felt anything a week prior to Evelyn's wedding. At work, one received an unexpected visitor. My soon-to-be brother-in-law is Scott. Standing before my desk, he appeared uneasy in his pricey suit. "Can we have a conversation?" "Hasn't?" he questioned. I now learnt the true source of the funds. A beat skipped in my chest. He clarified that before to the wedding, my parents' accountant was assisting us in reviewing our financial situation. He inquired as to the source of the large deposits he saw in Evelyn's account. She sobbed and opened out to me. I waited while leaning back in my chair. I didn't know. He shook his head in admission. She informed me that she had been saving for her ideal wedding for years. She claimed she could afford it, even though I suggested we have a modest party. Had I known, she would have stolen her parents' house money. As he walked out of my office, his voice faded. I had a range of feelings that I didn't fully comprehend. Since Evelyn had been pampered and self-centered since she was a little child, I wanted to warn him about what he was getting into, but I also realized that he had to make his own decisions. Evelyn's wedding day finally arrived. The Monday in July was beautiful and ideal. I didn't go. However, I subsequently came upon the images on social media. The champagne fountain, the fireworks show, the horse-drawn carriage. The White Dove release, all of this was just as Evelyn had imagined, and it was funded with funds that ought to have provided our parents with a secure home. My phone rang 7 months after the wedding, and I woke up that night thinking about my parents sitting at that extravagant wedding, surrounded by luxury and money, knowing they would return home to a house that was practically falling apart. The number belonged to my parents. Something compelled me to pick up Emma even though I nearly didn't respond. Mom spoke in a little weary voice. "This place is terrible. The home. It's becoming worse." I remained silent as I waited. Last week, a pipe burst in the bathroom upstairs. "We cannot afford to make the necessary repairs. The water in the hole has to be turned off by your father." I tightened my jaw. "We attempted to call Evelyn," she added. "After the wedding, she said she would support us, but now she claims they are having financial difficulties. It has to do with Scott's family company, enduring a difficult quarter." I inhaled deeply. "What are you looking for from me?" I inquired in a calm voice, Mom. She paused. Then she murmured, "We made a mistake," in a little weak voice. "Now we are aware of that." She gave a trembling sigh. "A fragment of plaster landed on your dad's cap. He required 2 sutures. We were fortunate, the doctor stated, that it wasn't worse. Recalling the contractor's cautions from 3 years prior, I closed my eyes. Have you attempted to contact Evelyn once more? Mom gave me a sour laugh when I inquired. Scott is seldom talking to her. After their honeymoon, they got into a quarrel over money. In the Maldives, she apparently used up all of their shared credit cards. I blinked. What? Scott's parents became concerned. And, well, it's not good, Mom went on. I inhaled deeply. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. And to my astonishment, I did mean it. I meant it. Our parents had sacrificed their future for Evelyn's fairy tale, not because I felt sorry for her. And now I was crumbling too. Would you be able to assist us? Mom's voice broke. Only with a pipe. The bathroom upstairs is completely off limits to us. Going up and down the stairs to use the basement loo at night is causing your father's back pain. The house Henry and I were saving for came to mind. Regarding our wedding arrangements, Mom, I answered firmly, I can't. I can no longer be of assistance. You should speak with Evelyn. I hung up and then phoned Madison. What Mom hadn't told me, she did. Scott and Evelyn had a lavish flat, a present from his parents for their wedding. However, they were already having marital problems. In addition to the money she had stolen from her parents, Scott had discovered that Evelyn had taken out multiple personal loans to pay for additional wedding-related expenses. In the meantime, Mom had begun looking for part-time work, and Dad continued to work despite the fact that he should have retired. Mold and water damage had forced them to close off the entire upper floor of their home. Madison informed me that your father is too proud to ask for assistance. But that house is getting dangerous, Emma. The damage from the water is getting worse. They are unable to pay for either fixing it or moving out. 3 years ago, I recalled standing in that house, working with the contractors to arrange for my parents to relocate to a safer location. They should have waited. I wish they had believed me. Rather than accepting Evelyn's hollow assurances, Henry discovered me sitting in our home office that evening, looking at old photos of my parents' home from before everything that had happened. Aren't you considering assisting them? He inquired. No, I said firmly. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. For our house, we need our savings. To keep them warm, I refused to burn myself alive. After what they did, I added my voice steadily. Henry looked at me for a while. But witnessing their suffering is killing you. Softly, he said. I looked over at him. I'm crying. It is, of course. They are my parents. However, they decided on this. They put Evelyn's one-day dream ahead of their own prospects. Instead of embracing my genuine assistance, they choose to trust her falsehoods. And now, they must now live with their decisions. I had a dream about the old house that night. In my dream, I was a kid once more, sitting in my bedroom and tapping on the window while listening to the rain. When I looked up, however, I saw that the ceiling was breaking and that water was flowing down. Despite my efforts to stop it, the water continued to flow. I was unable to capture every drop. After Evelyn's wedding, Madison phoned me at work 3 years later. She spoke tensely. Scott and Evelyn are divorcing. Without making any small conversation, she said, I experienced a dreary sense of certain fate. She is returning to your parents' house. Aunt Madison went on. The last straw came when Scott discovered that she had been using their joint credit cards covertly for months after he had cut her off, concealing letters, credit card bills, and past due notifications. His parents get involved, and since the prenuptial agreement is being upheld, she will receive nothing at all. Fix it, Aunt Madison. Her personal debt from the wedding debts is $60,000. In addition, she accrued a lot of credit card debt in an effort to maintain appearances. Scott's family has had enough of her. They no longer wish to interact with her. I reflected about the wedding, which cost $380,000. All that money, the pyrotechnics, the gold leaf cake, and the doves. My funds. For a marriage that lasted only 3 years, my parents' future was destroyed. Recalling what the contractor told me 4 years ago, I closed my eyes. My folks would be in a new home right now if we had followed the original plan. They were in their 60s, working themselves to the bone, still residing in half of a house that had been condemned, and now caring for their daughter, who was unemployed and broke. I drove by my parents' house that night, I continued. I simply looked. Through the windows, Evelyn's expensive car, which she was obviously no longer able to afford, was already parked in the driveway. The lights were on, and I could see shadows moving within. Although none of us had anticipated it, Evelyn was back in the house where we grew up. I met Evelyn in my mom's grocery shop the next day. She had changed appearance. The high-end clothing and flawless nails had vanished. Her nails were chipped and her clothes were faded. She noticed me. However, she pushed her cart down another aisle and turned away without saying anything. I'm getting married today. Standing in the mirror, I'm adjusting my plain white dress. Evelyn's $40,000 expensive gown is nothing like it. I reflect on how our paths have diverged. Only Madison and his immediate family will be present for Henry and my courthouse wedding. We'll then go to our favorite restaurant for supper. The total cost of the wedding will be less than Evelyn's flower purchase by themselves. Do you really want to decline their invitation? Last night, Henry asked me, referring to Evelyn and my parents. I gave a head shake. 4 years ago, they made their decision. I grinned as I met his gaze directly. I'm building mine now. Aunt Madison's news wasn't good. Last month, the home was formally condemned. Using what little money they had left over for the security deposit, my parents had to relocate into a tiny 3-bedroom flat with Evelyn. Mom is still employed at the supermarket. Dad had to retire at last. He couldn't continue because of his health. Evelyn, too. She is attempting to pay off her massive debt by working as a waitress. Madison just informed me about your mother's enquiries concerning you. On her nightstand, she keeps the notification of your courthouse wedding. Our Madison had received the announcement from me, not to them directly. No invitation was sent. I just wanted to let you know that I was getting married. After receiving it, Mom attempted to call, but I left it on voicemail. After being burnt, certain bridges cannot be reconstructed. At Madison, they now comprehend. Claim to be aware of their grave error. According to your father, that is his greatest regret in life, putting the dream of one daughter ahead of the reality of the other. However, comprehension does not alter anything. The $160,000 they handed away is not recovered. Their condemned house isn't fixed by it. It doesn't change the fact that they utterly violated my confidence. Evelyn continues to live with them and works double shifts in order to pay off her wedding debt. The opulent flat is no longer there. The high-end clothing is no longer available. The pricey vehicle is no longer there. She occasionally shares on social media about discovering the real meaning of family and life lessons. I have, however, silenced her accounts. After everything that transpired yesterday, her words seem meaningless. My folks sent me a box, a present for the wedding. Curiosity overcame me, and I nearly returned it without opening it. Mom's antique pearl necklace was inside. A message was the only precious item she had left. We ought to have trusted you. We ought to have seen your true self. The accountable one. The one who cares. The one who attempted to provide us with a viable future. Not a one-day fantasy. We sincerely apologize. You are loved by us. I shut the box. I might wear the necklace someday. Not today, though. Henry got me a modest silver pendant for our first anniversary, which I'm wearing today. It isn't costly. It's genuine, yet it's not ostentatious. Similar to our affection. Similar to our plans. Similar to our future. Following the wedding, Henry and I will return home to the house we were able to purchase with our savings. It's not very fancy, a little 3-bedroom home in a peaceful area. However, it belongs to us, founded on meticulous preparation and sincere labor, not plots and dreams. Are you ready? Henry peers into the room and asks. I smile as I give the mirror one more glance. Yes, I am ready, I say. I give the mirror one last glance. I'm wearing a plain dress. I don't wear a lot of makeup. This morning, I collected my flowers from the nearby woodland. I'm getting married to a man I adore, but it won't be as extravagant as Evelyn's extravagant wedding. Surrounded by trustworthy individuals, establishing a life grounded in fact rather than fiction. Are you ready? I say. And I really do mean it this time. All I've learned comes to mind as we travel to the courts. I've discovered that if you allow them to, certain individuals will steal everything from you. That overindulgent parents may love their kids in all the wrong ways. Decades of hard work and trust may be destroyed by just one poor decision. However, I've also gained knowledge about my own power. I now know how to establish limits, how to put truth ahead of imagination, how to construct a life on firm footing rather than shifting sand.